Hey everyone, welcome back to more malicious compliance stories from Reddit. In this satisfying video, picture your boss summoning you to his office, acknowledging the company is in trouble, and then slashing your paycheck to below what a coffee shop worker earns, all while still expecting you to grind through 12-hour coding sessions. He figured he could pressure me into rescuing his business for next to nothing, but he was dead wrong. Let's jump straight into it. The first malicious compliance story goes by the title, Cut My Salary in Half. I'll cut my output in half. Say goodbye to your business. So, a couple of years back, I was employed at a small tech startup. The kind where startup culture was basically code for, we can't pay you properly, but here's a ping pong table and some equity that will never see the light of day. The company had around 15 people total, and I was one of just 3 developers on the team. This all unfolded early in my professional life. I've been working in the industry for roughly 2 years. 1 year at my first employer before they downsized, then 6 months at this particular startup. I wasn't a senior developer by any stretch, but I had enough skills to carry my weight and handle most tasks on my own. My boss, let's call him Carl, had secured this enormous contract with a client who needed a sophisticated inventory management system built entirely from the ground up. The project was bold, the timeline was brutal, and Carl had severely underbid just to land the deal. His answer to the impossible schedule? Have me pull 80-hour weeks while earning $55,000 a year. To put that in perspective, that works out to roughly $26 an hour on a standard 40-hour week. But given the hours I was actually logging, it was closer to $13 an hour. I was essentially earning what I could have made running a register at Target. Except instead of scanning barcodes, I was architecting complex databases and building API integrations, surviving on energy drinks and whatever takeout I could scarf down between marathon coding sprints. But I was young, hungry to prove myself, and Carl had a real talent for the whole we're all in this together motivational pep talk. So I kept my head down and pushed through. Nights, weekends, holidays, none of it was off limits. I kept telling myself it would all pay off once the project launched and the company hit its stride. Then, about 6 months into the project, Carl called me into his office. So, I've been going over the numbers, he said, carefully avoiding eye contact. And we need to make some adjustments to the budget. My stomach hit the floor. I knew exactly where this was headed. The client contract isn't bringing in the revenue we anticipated at this point, and we're dealing with some cash flow problems. So I'm bringing your salary down to $30,000 annually. I just stared at him. $30,000. That was nearly a 45% cut. Less than what I made at my very first job out of college. I know it's not ideal, Carl went on, his tone carrying the air of someone who thought he was being generous. But we all have to make sacrifices right now. Once the project ships and the money starts flowing, we can revisit your compensation. Carl, I can't survive on $30,000 a year. My rent alone is, then maybe you should look for a cheaper apartment or find a roommate, he shrugged. Look, if you can't be flexible when things get hard, maybe you should ask yourself whether this is really the right place for you. I walked out of that meeting feeling like I'd taken a punch to the stomach. But more than that, I was furious. Carl had effectively cut my pay in half, while still expecting me to run myself into the ground on a project that only existed because he had underbid and overpromised. That evening, I sat down and did the arithmetic. $30,000 a year divided by 52 weeks divided by 40 hours a week. That came out to roughly $14.42 an hour, less than a barista earns at Starbucks. And then a thought clicked into place. Carl had said he needed me to finish the project. He had also said that if I wasn't willing to be flexible, maybe I should reconsider whether this was the right fit. He'd have my salary without touching my responsibilities. So I decided to deliver exactly what he was paying for. The salary cut landed in early March. The project deadline was end of May, about 12 weeks out. The next morning, I walked in at 9 o'clock and got to work. But when 5 o'clock came around, I saved everything, logged off, and headed home. No more 12-hour days, no more weekend sessions. 40 hours a week, not a second over. During that first week of reduced hours, Carl kept trying to guilt trip me. He'd linger by my desk around 4:45 p.m., dropping pointed remarks about team spirit and dedication. I'd just smile, say my work at exactly 5 o'clock, and walk out. By week 2, the panic was setting in. The client had started calling every day wanting progress updates. Carl kept insisting everything was on schedule, but the numbers weren't adding up. My output had dropped to roughly 40% of what it used to be. At that pace, the May deadline was going to slide to August, possibly September. Week 3, Carl pulled me into his office again. "Look," he said, "I know we had that conversation about your salary, but I need you back on extended hours, just until the project wraps up." "Are you restoring my salary?" "Well, no, but then no." His face turned a shade of purple. "You're being incredibly selfish right now. This project is critical to the company, and my rent is critical to me. I'm giving you exactly 40 hours a week, which is what my contract specifies. If you want more, we can talk about a raise." He didn't bring it up again, but the passive-aggressive atmosphere got noticeably worse. People in the office told me he'd been venting to other employees, labeling me uncommitted and claiming I didn't understand startup culture. Meanwhile, I kept putting in my 40 hours and browsing job listings on my phone at lunch and after I got home. The project continued to slip further behind. By mid-April, I knocked out roughly 70% of the work, but I was stuck on a complex integration that genuinely needed the kind of deep, uninterrupted focus I used to give it back when I was working 12-hour days. That's when a recruiter called. Better company. $72,000. Actual work-life balance. Benefits that included real things like health insurance and 401k matching. The interview process stretched across 3 weeks because they were meticulous, but they extended an offer in early May. I ran the numbers. The project deadline was May 28th. My new start date was June 2nd. That left me approximately 3 weeks to complete the final 30% of the project while working 40-hour weeks. Mathematically, it was impossible. I knew it. Carl knew it, even if he was still in denial. But at that point, it wasn't my problem anymore. On a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks before the deadline, I walked into the office and placed my resignation letter on Carl's desk. 2 weeks' notice, professional, cordial. Carl's expression went from baffled to full-blown panic in about 3 seconds. "You can't just walk out on us. What about the project? You're the only one who understands the code base. You told me to think about whether this was the right place for me if I wasn't willing to be flexible. So I did exactly that. I thought about it and found a better opportunity. But the deadline is in 3 weeks. The client is going to destroy us." That sounds like something you should have factored in before cutting my pay in half and expecting me to keep grinding through 80-hour weeks. "I'll restore your salary. I'll give you a raise. I've already accepted another position. Then at least stay through the deadline. I'll pay you. My notice period is 2 weeks. After that, I'm done." Carl threw everything at the wall during those final 2 weeks. Guilt trips, equity promises, veiled threats about my professional reputation, even attempts to recruit other employees to work on me. But none of it landed. I showed up, worked my 40 hours, did the job adequately, but not exceptionally. On my last day, I handed over everything I completed, passed along the login credentials, and left. I didn't hang around for a farewell gathering. There wasn't one anyway. Here's what unfolded after I walked out. According to Christy, one of the other developers I'd kept in contact with, Carl attempted to push the project to completion himself. The problem was that Carl hadn't written a line of code in years, and when he had, it was basic web stuff. He was now staring down a complex system with multiple integrations, custom algorithms, and roughly 3 months of work that might as well have been written in ancient Greek. He brought in a contractor, but that contractor took one look at the code base and quoted him $60,000 in 8 weeks to complete and properly test everything. Carl tried to haggle. The contractor walked. The deadline came and went with the project sitting at roughly 75% done and completely untested. The client was livid. They had been making commitments to their own stakeholders based on Carl's assurances that everything was on track. Carl pleaded for an extension. The client gave him 2 weeks and made it crystal clear this was his final chance. He brought in another contractor, cheaper this time. That contractor introduced 3 critical bugs in the first week and then vanished without completing anything. Carl was now in a worse position than when I'd left, and the client pulled the contract entirely. Not only did they refuse to pay the remaining balance, they filed a lawsuit for breach of contract. The original contract was valued at $180,000, but they were pursuing far more than that. According to Christie, their legal team was claiming over $400,000 in consequential damages, missed production deadlines, penalty payments to their own clients, and lost business opportunities. Carl's business insurance only covered up to $100,000. And apparently, there was some clause about willful failure to perform that the insurer was attempting to invoke to deny coverage altogether. The lawsuit dragged on for months. Carl tried to settle early for the contract amount plus roughly $50,000, but the client wasn't interested in settling. They wanted to make an example of him. Their legal team had clearly decided that the precedent was worth more than whatever Carl could scrape together. The legal fees alone were bleeding him dry. Christie told me he'd cycled through 3 different attorneys because he couldn't keep up with their retainers. On top of that, word had gotten around to Carl's other clients about the botch project and the pending lawsuit. 2 of them suspended their contracts to reassess their vendor relationships. Another let their contract expire without renewal. The company went from struggling to collapsing. Carl laid off half the staff, then half again. Christie jumped ship about 4 months after I left. The office shut down 6 months after my departure, and the lawsuit eventually settled for a figure that wiped Carl out financially. The exact number was never confirmed, but Christie heard it was somewhere in the neighborhood of $200,000 plus legal fees. About 3 months after the company folded, I received an email from Carl. He'd sent it from a Gmail account to my work address, which he must have dug up through LinkedIn or something. The subject line read, "Thanks for nothing." The message itself was a rambling 3-paragraph tirade about how I had abandoned the team, sabotaged the project by leaving at such a pivotal moment, and how if I just held on a little longer, everything would have worked out. He wrapped it up with something along the lines of, "I hope you're happy with yourself. You destroyed people's livelihoods." I read it once, thought briefly about replying, then deleted it. Carl had dismantled his own company through his own choices. I had simply stopped enabling him. He made his decision when he told me to consider whether I really wanted to be there. He made his decision when he refused to restore my pay, even as the deadline bore down on him. I just gave him precisely what he was paying for: 40 hours a week of adequate work at $14.42 an hour. He wanted me to sacrifice my financial stability for his business. When I declined, he lost everything. The next one is a kind of wholesome, genuinely fascinating story posted by user KWNBY titled, "Odd Behavior from Old Woman Neighbor." So, my neighbor is peculiar, and she's doing peculiar things, and I could really use some advice on how to handle it. She's elderly, lives alone, and has a dog she brings with her everywhere. She walks the dog several times a day and lets it do its business in my yard. Sometimes she picks it up, sometimes she doesn't. I mostly let it go because I prefer to keep things civil. But last year, she grabbed a can of spray, paint, and drew circles around other dogs' droppings right on my lawn. Literally just outlined them with paint. It annoyed me, but I let it go. Well, she just did it again sometime within the last day or so. White spray paints circles around some dog poop. I'd rather not confront her directly, because if I did, I'd absolutely record it so she can't accuse me of harassing her. I was considering putting up a sign in my yard saying something like, "Please don't spray paint circles around dog poop," but I'm not entirely sure. What would you do in this situation? And yeah, let me know in the comments what you do if you found yourself dealing with a neighbor like this. Also, this story has several updates, so definitely stick around to the end. Comment 1. Opie, you are far more laid back about this than I would be, and I say that as a somewhat elderly woman myself. Politely ask her why she's doing this, but bring a witness along and quietly record the exchange. She might be dealing with dementia, and your video could help establish that she needs intervention at some point down the road. Comment 2. You can approach her without it becoming confrontational. Just ask directly, "Why are you spray painting circles around dog poop in my yard?" She'll explain, because in her mind, she's being helpful. There doesn't seem to be any bad intent here. From there, you have options. You could ask her to stop and see whether she actually does, which might also reveal whether she has any memory issues. If you don't have contact information for her family, your best avenue might be getting APS involved. Or you could do what I do, redirect her. Ask her to spray paint the poop itself rather than drawing circles around it, so you can remove it without tearing up so much grass. Sometimes older folks don't have dementia or Alzheimer's. Sometimes they're simply bored. Dog poop enforcement might genuinely be your cause. She could be totally fine, or she might not be. You won't know until you've had a few conversations. I know it's not your responsibility to figure her out, but you're clearly a caring person who's genuinely concerned. Update 1. I am completely beside myself, honestly. So after the whole spray paint around the poop situation, now I have to deal with this. When I moved into the house, the previous owner was something of a semi-hoarder. The basement was full of junk, and I've been gradually clearing it out. No big rush since I don't use the basement, so out of sight, out of mind. Anyway, this past weekend, I set a small pile of old wood, a cart, and a few miscellaneous items by the curb for my guy to come collect. He ended up not being able to make it and had to reschedule. Well, the city police called me asking whether the pile out front was mine. It was the same really pleasant officer I'd spoken with previously about the spray painting. He had my number on file from that interaction. I explained that my guy was supposed to have already picked it up and would be coming soon. He said, "Okay, no problem." I asked if someone had filed a complaint, and of course they had. You can guess who. I honestly think this woman has it out for me and is hunting for anything she can use to cause trouble. I'm thinking about putting up some kind of sign in my yard. At this point, I'm not sure that talking to her again will accomplish anything. I'm not a careless person, and I don't let trash pile up in my yard. I was literally cleaning out my basement, and the pickup just got delayed. I know the straightforward answer is simply not to leave anything out, but that's just how things unfolded. What kind of signs would you put up, or what would you do in this scenario? Comment 1. Opie really needs to contact Adult Protective Services and see if they can step in. It's pretty clear this woman isn't doing well mentally. Edit. For those who missed the earlier post about the dog poop and spray paint, the other neighbors have been dealing with increasingly erratic behavior from this woman. And that's precisely the kind of situation APS was created for. An elderly adult with no support network who is slowly losing her grip on reality. Not calling because you assume nothing will be done only guarantees that nothing gets done to help someone who almost certainly qualifies for Medicaid or Medicare and could benefit from assistance. It isn't vindictive or retaliatory to make one phone call and request a wellness check. It also started a paper trail in case things deteriorate further. Local police simply aren't equipped, nor inclined, to handle situations like this. Comment 2. I thought you mentioned in your earlier post that she may have some cognitive decline. From where I'm sitting, none of this is really about you. She seems fixated on safety. The spray paint and the complaint about the junk actually have a lot in common. A fear that someone might come into contact with dog poop or debris and get hurt or bothered. If this is cognitive decline, I'd encourage you not to take it personally and not to consider any kind of retaliation. Your best move might be to reach out to her family and try to extend a little grace. I genuinely don't think she's deliberately trying to make your life harder. Update 2. Thank you all for your input on how to handle my neighbor and the spray-painted circles. I honestly wasn't expecting so many responses. Early this morning, I spotted her as she was walking by. I had the weekend off, was taking out the trash, and decided on the spot to just call her over. I was alone and didn't have my phone on me to record the conversation, but I figured I'd just go for it. For those who were wondering whether she might have some cognitive issue, and I was wondering the same, I'm fairly confident we can chalk this up to that. There was no malicious intent whatsoever. I believe she was marking the poop so she wouldn't accidentally step in it. I don't want to push things any further. We ended up chatting for a while about the weather, upcoming holidays, just light conversation. I'm going to make a point of being a bit more friendly whenever I see her going forward, and hopefully she'll just stop doing it on her own. If I spot any more droppings near the road, I'll have someone come pick them up. I honestly can't say for certain whether it's her dog or a stray, but either way, I'd like to keep my yard tidy. Update 3. So this evening my wife, son, and 2 daughters and I walked over to my elderly neighbor's house with a batch of cookies. I thought it would be a nice way to show the kids how to handle a situation with kindness and maturity. We sat at her table for about 20 minutes, talked, and learned quite a bit. She's 73 years old, has absolutely no family in the state, and her husband passed away nearly 19 years ago. She's clearly very lonely, and her only real companion is her dog, who is getting on in years himself, that she cares for and dotes on. She walks him 3 to 4 times a day and takes him to the park in town a few times a week. Now, the question everyone's been wondering about, including us: why the spray-painted circles? She said it was so that she and the neighborhood kids wouldn't accidentally step in the poop. In her heart, she genuinely thought she was doing something helpful. We thanked her for her concern and let her know we'd keep an eye out. In reality, we'll just make sure to scoop anything we notice. Anyway, I think we made a new friend, and we're planning to stop by Thanksgiving with a dish and again at Christmas. She turned out to be a genuinely lovely woman who was simply lonely. And yes, we left her our number and told her to call if she ever needs anything. Thank you again to everyone who followed along. And yeah, let me know in the comments if you enjoy these more uplifting, wholesome stories. I think a little variety goes a long way. The final one is a brilliant petty revenge story titled, "My boss always found something wrong with my monthly reports and cover letters, so I used her old ones and watched her tear them apart." I was telling this story the other night and was encouraged to share it here. This goes back about 20 years when I was working at State Street Bank under one of the worst human beings I've ever encountered, a woman named Paula. Real place, real name, and I don't care. If you're in Boston and thinking about working there, skip it. It's a miserable workplace. Anyway, on to the story. I had just joined Paula's team, a small project group handling complex financial operations with high SVP visibility. That was the pitch, anyway. In reality, it was a mushroom farm. Paula kept you in the dark and fed you nothing but garbage. All I did was compile reports and gather data from people who were visibly terrified of my team. Needless to say, I'd been bait and switched and was actively looking to get out almost from the moment I arrived. Paula had a habit of tearing your work to shreds over the most absurd, trivial details. One of the reports I was responsible for was a weekly update on certain oil warrants out of Nigeria. For anyone unfamiliar, a warrant is essentially an agreement to purchase a commodity at a fixed price, regardless of what the current market rate is. In this case, there was an option to buy at $30 per barrel when prices had surged to $90 per barrel. We had no idea whether the holder was even aware of this, but we were required to monitor and report it because the potential liability and losses would have been enormous. Week after week after week, Paula would review the report and rip me a new one over the formatting, the wording, and every petty little thing that had nothing to do with whether the actual numbers were correct. Total nitpicking nonsense. One day, I was browsing through the network files and stumbled across an old folder from a similar project. It was Paula's own work from before she'd been given a team to manage. So I decided to mirror her format for everything, restructuring the report layout to match hers exactly and lifting the cover letter language directly from her previous versions. I brought it to her office for her review and sign off, and she completely lost it. She demanded to know what had happened to the previous format. I told her that since she never seemed satisfied with what I'd been producing, I thought it made sense to try something different. She declared it was worse than anything I'd submitted before, probably the most inadequate report she'd ever seen from me. She went on and on about it for what felt like an eternity. I stood there with a blank expression and didn't say a word. Her final question was what on earth I had been thinking when I made these changes. I told her I had used the exact same formatting and language that she herself had used when working on a comparable report a few years earlier, that I'd found the folder on the network, and had reproduced her past work verbatim, updating only the figures and relevant information. I handed her printed copies of her original reports and letters to compare side by side. She just looked at me with this completely dumbfounded expression. I asked if it was really that bad. Should I revert to my own format? She silently signed off on the reports and told me to send them as they were. I wanted to confirm they were good to go, given that less than a minute earlier, she'd essentially called them unreadable. She said they were fine as is and that there wasn't time to redo everything. So I sent them out. And I was savvy enough to have already tracked down and saved all of her old work as reference material. I noticed that after that confrontation, she went in and deleted and relocated the original folders. I had expected her to. But this little cat and mouse game continued for the rest of my time there. I'd use her templates and past work and wait for her to tear it apart. After it happened a few more times, she eventually figured out that I collected all of them. She asked directly, and I told her I had built SOPs using all of her historical work and saved everything locally. It seemed like the logical thing to do. I managed to quit a few months later. F you, Paula. And yeah, thanks for watching, everyone. I'll catch you next time.